Hi, I'm Professor Glenn Parry from the Business School. I'll be talking today about collaborative research. I wanted to try and make this a bit more interesting for you, so I scribbled that title out. And I thought I'd talk about how to know more than I know without too much work. So my main area is on business models and value, and the sort of thinking is based on resource theory. And this title of this slide comes from Zimmerman's work, who said that resources are not, they become. What he meant by that was an umbrella is not really an umbrella until you use it. It's just an object you have to carry around. It's not really that valuable. And we can classify resources as operand, and they're things that you have to work upon, or operant, and those are resources that create benefit, that do the work, and that's people. So resources aren't valuable until they're used. So we actually want the service of resources. It's Edith Penrose, 59, said it's never the resources themselves that are inputs in the production process, but actually only the services resources render. So really there we're talking about the value that the objects and the things and the services that we use can give people. Now we say you don't create value in a vacuum. Now, resources are jointly involved in processes and practices where you co-create value. And that happens in context, so value always changes. The outcome of these value co-creation practices changes, it's dynamic. So value is always co-created in context. So let's look at a business model. So very simply, we're trying to create value, co-create value with our partners. So we produce some form of value proposition. That's what the business offers. But the value proposition can only be realized when it's used. So we sell like an umbrella or some shoes, and the value of those things are only realized when they're used, and that use is in some form of context. With our umbrella example, it's either raining or it's not. And within our business model, we have to get some form of sustainable worth. We've got to capture some money to pay our people, to buy our resources. So that's the fundamentals of what a business model is. And this is sort of my academic underpinning in a slide. So academically, I started collaborating many years ago. This was Dr. Cameron Jones, 1996, I think we wrote our first paper. And since then, I've collaborated with an awful lot of people. This was quite an interesting exercise, finding pictures of all the people I've written papers in business with. And there's over 70 people here. So I collaborated a great deal. So I collaborate to co-create value. Why does collaboration help? Well, we're academics, so I found a nice piece of academic theory, and I've been reading Gadamer for quite some time, and he talks about philosophical hermeneutics, and who doesn't love to talk about that? So hermeneutics, it's the word that describes how people study texts from different cultures or periods and try and understand what was meant, and it's the discovery of truth through analysis of information. So Gadamer was driven by a desire to understand religious text, but developed this method for interpreting what is true. And that's super useful. I mean, his work's really insightful when it comes to reading any form of text to understand really what is true. I mean, that's mostly the scientific method. So he examined what is it to understand. And he says that when we read, when we seek understanding, we're always goal-oriented. We're always trying to understand for a reason. He also says that we can't start our understanding from a point outside of the world, because actually we are in the world. And he said individuals have prejudice. We prejudge. We have a set of understandings. You can't open a door unless you've prejudged that situation, and that's the root of what prejudices are. We've made some prejudgments. And if we start to value people's prejudices, to surface them and say, okay, these are my current prejudgment, then we can challenge them, engage with them, and push forward when we engage with other individuals, because when we engage with individuals, we understand their prejudice, and we call that engagement process, if you like, a co-creation process. That's called the dialogue. So in attempting to understand, we apply his concept of mercy, and from that he's saying that we must accept that fundamentally we're probably wrong. We can't reach some objective understanding as we go through time, because the world is dynamic and contextual, and we'll always understand new things. What we need to accept is we can only understand in a different way. So that's a really interesting way of thinking about what you know, that you're probably wrong, and you'll understand in different ways in the future. And as long as you accept that you have these prejudices, then you can learn, you can co-create value effectively in your research through collaboration. So let's look at the application of hermeneutics in dialogue. So what Gadamer says is you have some original proposition, your position of understanding, from where the dialogue begins between two subjects, subject 1 and 2, and you might undertake that dialogue through reading or through talking or interacting with someone else. The dialogue leads to merged horizons of understanding or intersubjectivity. So you start with a proposition, your understanding of the world, you have this intersubjectivity, this meeting of minds, and then you end up with a new horizon. So from this simple model of merging horizons, we can draw insight, we can construct complex research process, which he calls hermeneutic cycles of knowledge acquisition. So if we wanted to model collaboration, we can say, well, we start here with our knowledge horizon 1. We have this engagement, and then we get a new knowledge horizon, and we can keep doing that. The more we share, the more we collaborate, the more we develop new and different understandings, and our knowledge horizons are expanded. So this is a good theoretical underpinning of really why we need to collaborate to extend our knowledge base. Now, if we then look at Thomas Kuhn, he saw many people are schooled in a particular way that influence their reasoning. So if you keep talking to people with very similar knowledge horizons to you, and your collaborators are all just like you, well, you're going to get stuck in a paradigm. To make those paradigm shifts, those 4-star papers either require crises where more ideas are heard, and that often from younger people, or you need to go seeking out those people. New ideas break older logics, older embedded understandings, and this leads to those paradigm shifts that fundamentally businesses always want, or academics always want, really, to make those innovative breakthroughs. Now, Paul Feyerabend took this idea to the next level and espoused anarchy in science to achieve progress. His book's called Farewell to Reason, and he said that any breakthrough was unlikely for those schooled in a paradigm. Whilst his work is often portrayed as, anything goes, pure anarchy, actually, if you read it carefully, he does demand rigor, which he says, we've got to separate the thinker from the crank, and you can see that all over, Twitter particularly. Lots of people fall into the latter. But, these radical ideas do come from strange areas. And as academics, it's worth engaging in really thinking about it and testing it, doing that rigor. And even though you reject it, it might expand your knowledge horizon. So I'm going to talk about some of my projects where I've collaborated. The first one is the Transdisciplinary Design Engineering project, or TREND. The challenge here is that to meet future manufacturing need, we're going to need individuals to transcend disciplines, because the complex problems of the world require many different skills working together to solve them. So we start with Jean Piaget, super famous Swiss psychologist. Now in 1970 he submitted a paper to a conference, and right at the end he said, we may hope to see a higher stage succeeding the stage of interdisciplinary relationships. This would be transdisciplinary, that would not only cover interactions or reciprocities between specialized research projects, but would place his relationships within a total system without any firm boundaries between disciplines. So he was looking at this higher stage, which he called transdisciplinarity. So we have this project, Collaborating to Explore Collaborating. We have a project of 4 company partners, 12 academics, mainly engineering disciplines, based at Bath, Bristol and Surrey universities. Now, the team is developing tools and methods for transdisciplinary working. We've got a tool to measure how disciplinary a project or team is. We're looking for best practice cases of transdisciplinary working. We're trying to figure out where do we need to be transdisciplinary and where isn't it required. So what do we mean by transdisciplinarity? Well, let me take you through the various hierarchy of approaches that you may be familiar with. Monodisciplinary working is sort of the lowest level of coordination, where you're working just in one discipline. That's a specialization, often working in isolation. You might work in a multidisciplinary way, where different disciplines work together in parallel, but with no real coordination or cooperation. Interdisciplinary work is coordinated collaboration, all working towards a higher level concept. None of them is dominant. In transdisciplinary working, the science and innovation is oriented towards a specific societal purpose, but you have shared meanings, shared understandings, common social system, and shared value. So this is the coordination of an entire system or ecosystem, and that coordination is across all levels. Here's another example of the Onbody therapeutic manufacturing system project. This was a £1 million project coming out of EPSRC. A number of universities involved in this. Now, this project looks at cancer treatment, CAR T-cell therapy in particular. This therapy starts by you remove blood from a patient to get their T cells, which are isolated through a process called leukapheresis. Then you make some CAR T cells in the lab. They're chimeric antigen receptors, and you insert them into the individual patient's T cell, and that creates these chimeric antigen receptors, the little things you can see sticking out of the side of the cell. You then multiply that cell, you grow them, and then you infuse the cells back into the patient. So you've taken cells out of a patient, you've changed them, you've multiplied them, you've put them back in. And what those cells do, depending on how you've modified them, in this case, they've been modified to identify and kill cancer cells. So those little antigen receptors recognize the antigens on the cancer cell, they stick to it and kill it. So you can see this is a very interesting targeted way of removing cancer from somebody's body. In B-cell acute lymphoblastic leukemia, which is the cancer we've been looking at, it can be anything between 40 and 97, 98% effective. I think pretty much every researcher at some point thinks they'd like to help cure cancer. Now, this Alms project has quite an interesting story. It started with Dr. Rob Barker and Dr. Qasim Rafiq. Now, Rob's a chemist at Kent University. Qasim is an expert on CAR T-cell therapies at UCL, and they were talking about manufacturing these new therapies. And at the moment, they're manufactured in central labs, and they were looking at this machine, the Clinimax Prodigy, and they thought they could make it smaller. And so they brought this team together of engineers, biosensors, fluid dynamics, and manufacturing people. And their project was to try and make this machine smaller, so maybe it could be worn on the body so that you could walk around instead of being stuck in a hospital bed. The problem they had was when they were looking at it, they thought this thing's going to be massively expensive. And I happened to be at an event with them all, and I was drinking whiskey in a bar, which is a nice place to be. And Rob came and sat by me, and we had a chat, and he told me the problem, that they got this little device, it was complex, and it was going to cost a lot of money. So with my business models hat on, I said, well, why don't you implement the printer business model? So I explained that a printer is actually quite a complex device, and notionally it should cost quite a lot of money. But if you give one to everyone that needs one, you get scale economies, you drive the price right down. So printers now, you can get them for sort of 30 quid. Actually, the expensive thing is the ink. And in this device, the expensive thing is the plasmid, the little car that you insert inside the person's cell. So you can build this device and just have the therapeutic as notionally slightly more expensive. So that's how I ended up on the team, because he said, actually, I think I need a business models person to really look at value here. Now, the challenge here is this is a fast moving area of research. There's lots of work on what's called allogenic therapies, which are not patient specific. So you can have cars that will go into anybody. There's lots of work looking at treating lots of different cancers. Leukemia is the most common type of cancer in children, but represents only 2.6% of cancers, with lung, breast, colorectal, and prostate being the main cancers that need treating. They're not quite there yet. Facilities are struggling to produce at the current rate of demand the CAR T-cell therapies we already have. Treatment is expensive. To treat the leukemia in children, NHS prices are £282,000 for one dose for a patient. Notionally, you should only need one dose. There's a production dilemma. It's lab-based. So it's flexible manufacture, it's expensive, high skills, it's difficult to do. You can go the machine-based route with that Clinimax Prodigy, but then you're stuck with the machine, you lose flexibility. Just the machine alone is 150,000, then you need £20,000 worth of consumables per machine, per customer. So you don't get a great deal of scalability, you're locked into a supplier. It's very difficult to do. And if a breakthrough is made in one of those prevalent cancers, how can we deliver this at scale? You know, if they say, oh, we can treat lung cancer now, the demand is high and there's just no way of meeting that. Currently, for CAR T-cell type treatments, this is the manufacturing process. And say it's centralized, and you'll see why. So we take blood from a patient through a process called leukapheresis, which isolates out the T cells in solution. Those are then preserved, frozen, and transported. On arrival at the manufacturing facility, this is in New York, the T cells are thawed, and we go through a process called selection and enrichment, which is selecting those cells that are viable, that are still alive, and the ones we want. They're then washed, cleaned down. You get rid of all the preservation, transportation fluids. You then have to stimulate them through an activation process before you go into gene transfer. You're transferring the gene in there. You've then got your altered cell. You then expand that, so you grow them in the lab. And when you've got enough to create a dose, you then freeze that sample again. You have to put it in special solutions to freeze it. You transport it. When it arrives at the hospital, they again must thaw it, check it, lots of checks on this to make sure that it's not become contaminated and that the cells are still alive, and only then can you infuse it. This process can take sort of 24 days. So that's the centralized manufacture process. Now, when we move it onto body, we get some benefits. You actually don't need a number of steps. So you end up with a leukapheresis process where you remove the blood from the body, you identify the T cells, you select and enrich them, the cells you want, you then transfer the gene in, and then you can infuse it, because the body is the best bioreactor. It will grow much better in the body than in any artificial machine you could get. We actually, in our machine, we take some for external testing, and there's a number of safeguards throughout this. So let's have a look at the prototype. This is a constructed overview of the prototype device. So here's our patient. This is our leukapheresis device. How this works is it's a microfluidic spiral. So blood is pumped through these microfluidic channels in a spiral, and through a sort of centrifugal force, the bigger cells are separated from the smaller cells. That actually allows us to separate out the first set of T cells that we want. That's then flown into this T cell activated selection tube. What we've got here is a surface, some surface chemistry. So the cells we want stick to the surface, and the cells we don't flow through. And then through a gating process, we can then say, right, we've flowed through the cells we want, and then you flow through a release agent that releases the cells from the surface, and then you can take those away and work on those. We then add the plasmid, so that's the little CAR cells that we want to infuse into the T cells that we've just separated out. So they're sort of put together in a sort of soup. We then put that through this tube. This is a process called electroporation. And if you add a small electric shock to a cell, the surface opens up. The plasmids can flow in. And actually this happens very quickly. If you put a brief electric shock through it, it opens and closes. And in that opening and closing, it sort of ingests, if you will, some of the plasmid. It's then inside the cell. Then we have this pre-release testing. This is a surface modified sensor. So cells that are viable and correctly made stick to the surface, and this creates impedance, so a capacitance, if you will. So as the surface builds up, we know, yes, we've got the right cells going through here. We have a fail-safe because there's a lot of testing, monitoring and sensing going on throughout the device. Any problems, it just fails safe. A little switch is closed and any fluids are just collected as elsewhere. If it's all testing fine, it flows straight back into the body. All of this is controlled and monitored by a low power control device. Again, fully fail safe. So if anything goes wrong, the machine shuts down. And we can also, because it's an on-body device, we can send messages to hospitals or computers or over to alert and send a message to the patient themselves that their devices may be shut down. The hub of all things is a personal data platform that we built. The challenge here was to develop a personal data platform which gives individuals back control over their data. So the challenge really was taking back control of data, and again, a transdisciplinary team, 7 professors from business, engineering, art, design and computer science, 9 original collaboratory firms. Project is still ongoing. We've been working for 6 years with over 3 million of funding. This is the original team. It's changed a little bit over the years, but at least 3 or 4 of us have stayed with it. We've also got a successful startup company. It's now into its 4th round of investor funding. That's DataSwift. Some of you may recognize this challenge, that we have a centralized monolithic set of data firms who are dominating the market. So you're interacting on your phone or on your computer with apps or websites, filling in forms, giving data directly to organizations. You get a service in return, but you don't get to keep the data. You can't reuse or reshare your data. Often you have to enter the same data into multiple sites. But those apps, those websites are sharing data with others. They're sharing it amongst themselves. You've got this back end of data servers. Who knows what's happening to your data? And you get spam emails as a result of this when somebody's sold your data or lost your data or there's been a breach. So we developed a decentralized data platform so that data could be controlled by users. Now, we call them personal data accounts, PDAs. Each user has their own virtual microserver. It's like a small computer in the cloud, so you've got processing power and you've got data storage. And this means you can reshare your data. It's a bit like an email account. You know, it's your email and you can send it backwards and forwards, but you've also got some, you've got some data there. You store your emails. But in this particular, because it's a microserver, you can actually do work in there. So this is what it looks like. It's sort of you link into your PDA, and then third-party apps can log into it. And this means that if another app says, oh, I'd like you to log into this, you can choose to share. If they're also based on a HAT platform, you can choose to share your PDA, and then you don't have to fill in all the same details. You can also decide what level of permissions, what level of data you want to share with them. You keep the data, not them. This is the cute bit about it, I think. This is the smart HAT engine, which sort of flips the model. These apps and services that you might access digitally, instead of you filling out a form, sending your form to them doing some analysis on that and sending you a result back, they can just send the analysis to your PDA. The analysis can be internal, and often a lot of the questions they're going to ask you already have, your name, your age, this sort of stuff can be stored in your area. They can do the analysis and just maybe return a result. So if we think of examples, if you look at, say, insurance, there's no reason that an insurance company couldn't send their algorithm to your PDA, work out your risk profile, say it's health insurance. You don't need to share your health data with the insurance company. You can hold it in your server. They can do their analysis there, and all they need to get back is, you're a risk 3, you're a risk 4, whatever it is, and maybe they'll then quote you a price or not. Lots of applications. Companies actually like this as well because they don't have GDPR problems. You hold the data, not them. So they're not processing personal data. It's all notionally anonymous, or it's just a price they're sharing with you perhaps. So again, you have control and the benefit for you and the company. This is the latest project I'm engaged with. It's called Decade. It's the Centre for the Decentralised Digital Economy. It's led by Surrey University. Again, we're working with Edinburgh and the Digital Catapult. What this is about is trying to achieve a fairer digital future. There's a transformational shift in our digital economy from classical models with these monolithic institutions controlling consumer data to these decentralized peer-to-peer economy with everyone as producer and consumer, kind of building on the ethos of the HAT, but we're particularly interested in some of the new technologies like blockchain you probably heard about. But Decade will identify and address the socio-technical challenges, not just the digital, but the value questions, what's good, the business models. We're going to examine the emerging decentralization in the digital economy from 3 perspectives. How value is co-created, looking at digital content. Think about YouTube and Spotify and Twitter and the ways that an artist's work is shared. We identify with and use digital services, but how are they using our data and manipulating us in return? And how's this affecting the way individuals and employers interact in a decentralized future of work? A good example of that is things like Deliveroo. This is only possible through these sort of decentralized work where everybody is self-employed in a sort of gig economy. So in this example, I'll explain how we can use blockchain to create trust in a product and process. Now, a blockchain is fundamentally just a digital list that's quite difficult to change. So when you write something into a blockchain, it's very difficult for anyone to change it. Now, customers are increasingly demanding evidence of where their goods or services have come from. And what we did was some case studies to demonstrate how you can ensure that that product is maybe GM free, or it's been safely made, or it's organic. We had 4 cases to illustrate how we can use blockchain to provide some provenance, some history, so you can trust the supply chain is true. And we looked at a World Wildlife Fund project looking at fish, Agridata, which is grain in, I think it was Australia, Demeter, which is wine provenance, massive fraud in wine, TechRock, which is a Chinese firm looking at baby food. And there's been some problems with Chinese baby food where people have been substituting what's supposed to be in the can for cheaper alternatives. And we've got some new studies coming forward looking at wine shipment from Australia and cocoa chocolate from Ecuador. Now, supply chain visibility, we showed can help reduce labour abuses, modern slavery, which is a big problem, because what you can do is you can capture information about the product all the way through the supply chain. If I just talk about the Tech Rock example, which is that baby food, there's a special device put on the top of it. It's a RFID tag, which gives you digital information about the product, when it was made, where it was made. There's also a QR code on that, so if you pick the can up at any point and scan it, you will actually see a photograph of your very can. If you try and take the lid off or tamper with it, the tag is broken and stops functioning. So it's very secure, and all the information, every time it's scanned, every time it's moved, that information is written into this blockchain, this list that's difficult to change, and you can see its complete history. You can see where it's been the whole time. So this provides visibility throughout the supply chain. So blockchain holds processing data that is then evidence of that process, that helps consumers and auditors ensure the products and processes are as they claim. It protects the product and the consumer against counterfeit and provides evidence of, say, organic or sustainable. So all of these complex things involve technology, supply chain management, thinking about ethics, and all of these are different disciplines, and we needed to collaborate with different academic and businesses to get these insights and really drive these projects forward. And this blockchain system built on top helps create this perception of trust. Within Decade, we've got a number of co-created project scenarios that we're going to be working on, and we worked with business even to outline the problems. So the first one is content provenance. This is looking at images and videos, and this is really about attacking fake news, because we can, using computer scientists, they can put embedded text or coding in an image. You can also generate cryptographic hashes, which are unique signatures which link to images and videos, that you can then, if somebody changes it, the signature no longer matches because it's unique. And we can use that as some form of truth checker, so you can check if your news is being manipulated or not. We can also use that to make micropayments, because we can say, look, this, you used this image, that image belongs to me. Look, here's my micro signature hidden in it. You've used it, please pay me. And you can actually automate that process. We're looking at next generation content production. Say a broadcaster is covering a live event. Typically, they might have a small number, say 4 to 10 cameras, but hundreds of people have iPhones or smartphones, and they have incredibly high quality cameras that are broadcast quality. Now, if they download a bit of software, you can then have a contract with them where if you as the editor can see all the different opportunities, all the different shots that they're taking, you can stitch them all together, and then you can say, oh look, we've got here this camera angle, I want that. I'll take that camera angle and I'll pay you for it in real time. We've got another project looking at decentralized work. So maybe you've got some sort of gig economy type job, but you want to certify that you've done a certain number of hours. So for instance, nursing is often like that. You might work in various different places, but you can centralize that into a record, this again list that's difficult to change, and somebody can verify it. So you've got this list of how many hours you've done, that's trusted, and it can automate then you being paid, maybe you're being promoted. It can help you maybe doing your tax and your compliance audit, because again we're sort of still thinking about this is data owned by the individual and released only with your consent. Another thing we can do with it is something called commodification of personal data, and this is personal data brokering. So in this example here is you might check into a hotel and you might say, well, I'll agree to share some insights into my stay in a hotel for a reduced room rate. So you might consent to somebody recording what you used in the minibar, what you watched on TV, what facilities you used, and through disclosure of that data, which could all be collected automatically, you'll get a cheaper stay in a hotel. And that sort of contract can be written and processed by a blockchain. All of these come with interesting ethical, design, computer science challenges, and that's great research that a good collaborative transdisciplinary team can address. So this is the Decade team. Professor John Colomosso at Surrey in Centre for Vision, Speech and Signal Processing. Professor Steve Schneider in cybersecurity. There's myself in the business school. Professor Chris Speed, he's the art professor up in Edinburgh, who you might notice was also on the HAT project. And Professor Burkhard Schaffer, he's a law professor, because obviously all these things I've spoken about have interesting legal questions. We're often ahead of the law and science. We've got a lot of researchers on this project as well. Many here from Surrey. We've also got people from Bath, from UWE, and from all over the place. We're very open, always interested to let new people join. Because again, go back to Gadamer, let's collaborate, let's merge those knowledge horizons. So this is a collaborative project, and actually we've got 34 external partners, all pledging £4.1 million worth of support. This includes organisations like the BBC, Google, Adobe, the National Cybersecurity Centre, revenue and customs. Think about the wine example. You're moving goods around the world. Really interesting if you can make that much more efficient. Think particularly about those questions around the Irish border, moving stuff across. Borders very important. Sony, all those sort of ideas around image processing. That's the sort of thing we're looking at. So we've got a really engaged, collaborative group. So my message really is, if you collaborate, you can achieve more. Building collaborative relationships has allowed me to join interesting projects way outside my niche. I've been part of projects raising over £43 million worth of funding support. I've published more than 70 papers in a number of different journals. How do I do this? Well, I think you've got to develop a core discourse that interests you. You've got to be passionate about it. Mine's, I'm into value and what good means, business models, and that flows down into sort of supply chain visibility, questions of power, trust, and privacy. And the dialogue, you talk to interesting people to explore how your discourses overlap. Network with coffee or Zoom or, in a bar. Share your interests with interesting people who are also, maybe in different areas, and really think about, this is what I'm really passionate about, and then let them tell you how you fit with them and their projects. And then, you can combine in interesting and mad ways. So that's my presentation. You can read my books, you can follow my projects, you can connect with me. I've got a YouTube channel where you can see all my presentations. I tend to put a lot of stuff up there. You can probably tell I'm really open to hearing new ideas from, I'm getting old now. God, I'm starting to feel that. But I'm always happy to hear and discuss and dialogue and, share those new horizons that you have, whatever discipline you're coming from. That's where we get the exciting, collaborative, innovative ideas developing. So any questions, welcome to hear from you.